"You're just a therapist, not an innovator," Dr. Gregory Hayes sneered, his voice echoing through his pristine office in Phoenix, Arizona. I sat across from his mahogany desk, watching him flip through my carefully compiled therapy notes with the casual dismissal of someone who had never spent sleepless nights worrying about a 16-year-old who refused to leave her bedroom. "This little anxiety treatment you've been tinkering with? It's nothing revolutionary. We'll integrate it into our standard protocols. My name is Talia Jackson, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a licensed clinical social worker at Sundale Mental Health Center, specializing in adolescent anxiety disorders." What Dr. Hayes was so casually dismissing wasn't just tinkering. It was 3 years of developing what I called the adaptive response integration method, a therapeutic approach that had transformed the lives of dozens of teenagers who had walked through our doors believing they were beyond help. The method combined cognitive behavioral techniques with mindfulness practices and peer support elements. But what made it unique was the structured way sessions built upon each other, creating what I called anxiety bridges, safe pathways for teens to cross from their fear-based responses to healthier coping mechanisms. I had watched kids who couldn't speak in group settings become confident advocates for their own mental health. I had seen teenagers who cut themselves develop healthy emotional regulation skills. This wasn't just another therapy protocol. It was a breakthrough that deserved recognition and proper implementation. But as I sat in Dr. Hayes' office that cold February morning, watching him dismiss my life's work with a wave of his manicured hand, I felt something darker than disappointment settling in my chest. He was already talking about rebranding the method, about presenting it at the upcoming National Mental Health Conference under the clinic's name. Under his name. "The clinic will, of course, provide you with proper credit as a contributing team member," he continued, not bothering to look up from the papers. "But this kind of innovation requires leadership vision, something that comes from administrative experience, not just therapeutic enthusiasm." I forced my expression to remain neutral, even as fury built behind my ribs like a pressure cooker reaching its limit. Dr. Hayes had never conducted a single therapy session since taking over as clinic director 3 years ago. His doctorate was in business administration, not psychology. He knew as much about treating teenage anxiety as I knew about performing brain surgery. Yet here he was, preparing to steal credit for work that had consumed every spare moment of my life. Work that had grown from my genuine desire to help kids who reminded me of my own anxious teenage self. Something told me this wasn't just about professional recognition. It was about power, control, and the casual cruelty of someone who believed his position entitled him to claim ownership of other people's innovations. Growing up in a household where my mother struggled with untreated anxiety had shaped my entire career path. I remembered being 12 years old, trying to talk my mom through panic attacks while my dad worked double shifts at the shipping company. Back then, mental health resources were sparse, and the stigma around therapy kept my family from seeking help until my mother's condition became so severe she couldn't leave the house for months. Those experiences had driven me to pursue my master's degree in clinical social work, and when I joined Sundale Mental Health Center fresh out of graduate school, I was determined to create the kind of supportive environment my family had never found. Dr. Hayes had seemed like an ally at first. He was new to the director position, having replaced the beloved Dr. Patricia Williams, who retired after 30 years of service. He spoke enthusiastically about innovation and modernizing treatment approaches, and I had initially been excited to work under someone who claimed to value creative problem-solving. The early warning signs had been subtle. He would attend my therapy sessions under the guise of quality assurance, taking extensive notes, but offering little feedback. He began requesting detailed reports about my methods, claiming he wanted to document best practices for potential replication. I had been flattered by his interest, proud that my work was being noticed and valued. I even stayed late countless evenings, typing up comprehensive summaries of my sessions and noting which techniques seemed most effective with different personality types. What I didn't realize was that Dr. Hayes was building a case study, not to support my work, but to appropriate it. He had been watching me develop the adaptive response integration method from its earliest stages, learning every component and understanding exactly how to replicate it without my involvement. The peer support groups I had initiated, the specialized mindfulness exercises I had adapted for teenage brains, the careful progression of sessions that built trust and resilience. He had been taking notes on everything. My relationship with my boyfriend Kevin had suffered during this period. He was a paramedic who understood demanding careers, but even he had grown frustrated with my long hours and obsessive focus on perfecting my therapeutic techniques. "You're pouring your whole life into that place," he had said during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "What are you getting back from it?" I had brushed off his concerns, believing that my dedication would be recognized and rewarded. I trusted Dr. Hayes when he praised my innovative spirit and promised that my contributions would be acknowledged appropriately. I believed that good work would speak for itself, that integrity and competence would ultimately triumph over office politics. As I sat in his office that February morning, listening to him systematically dismantle my professional identity, I realized how naive I had been to trust someone who viewed my passion as a weakness to exploit, rather than a strength to cultivate. The crushing revelation of Dr. Hayes' true intentions hit me fully 3 weeks later, when I received an email invitation to attend the National Mental Health Conference as clinic support staff. The agenda listed Dr. Hayes as the keynote speaker, presenting a revolutionary new treatment approach called the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol. My heart sank as I read the session description. It was my method, word for word, with every technique I had developed over years of careful practice and refinement. I stared at my computer screen in our cramped shared office, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and twisted my heart in their fist. Around me, my colleagues continued their work, completely unaware that I was experiencing what felt like professional murder. Dr. Hayes had taken my innovation, my passion project, my contribution to the field of adolescent mental health, and he was preparing to present it to hundreds of mental health professionals as his own creation. The email mentioned that clinic staff were welcome to attend the presentation to see how administrative leadership translates grassroots therapeutic work into systematic treatment protocols. The condescension was breathtaking. He was actually inviting me to watch him steal my life's work and present it as evidence of his own brilliance. I walked to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, finally allowing the tears of rage and betrayal to flow. This wasn't just about professional credit. It was about the fundamental violation of trust that made my chest feel hollow and raw. Every late night I had spent refining session protocols. Every weekend I had dedicated to researching supporting literature. Every moment of genuine celebration when a teenager broke through their anxiety barriers. All of it had been reduced to fodder for Dr. Hayes' career advancement. But as I sat in that bathroom stall, wiping my eyes with rough institutional toilet paper, something shifted inside me. The devastation began transforming into something harder and more focused. Dr. Hayes thought he could steal my work because he believed I was powerless to stop him. He saw me as just another disposable employee, someone whose innovations could be harvested and repackaged without consequence. He was wrong. I returned to my desk with a new sense of purpose. If Dr. Hayes wanted to claim ownership of my therapeutic method, he would have to prove it worked as effectively as I had demonstrated. More importantly, he would have to maintain the detailed documentation and outcome tracking that had made my work so successful in the first place. I began to formulate a plan that would require patience, meticulous record-keeping, and the kind of long-term strategic thinking that Dr. Hayes clearly believed I was incapable of. I would continue developing my method, but now I would do it with a different goal in mind. I would build an unshakable foundation of evidence that would ultimately expose his theft and restore proper credit to my work. The teenagers I treated deserved better than having their progress become a footnote to someone else's career ambitions. The National Mental Health Conference took place in Denver during the 3rd week of March, and I attended as planned, sitting in the back row of the auditorium like a spectator at my own execution. Dr. Hayes stood confidently at the podium, dressed in an expensive navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, presenting slides that showcased his innovative approach to teenage anxiety treatment. The Hayes Integrated Response Protocol represents a breakthrough in adolescent mental health intervention, he announced to the packed auditorium of mental health professionals. Through careful integration of cognitive behavioral techniques with mindfulness practices and structured peer support, we've achieved remarkable outcomes in treatment-resistant populations. I watched in sick fascination as he presented my case studies, my outcome data, my carefully documented progress notes, all stripped of my name and repackaged as evidence of his clinical genius. He spoke about the anxiety bridge concept, with the confidence of someone who had never actually guided a panic-stricken teenager across one. He described the peer support integration as if he had personally designed the group dynamics that had taken me months to perfect. The audience was captivated. I could see heads nodding throughout the auditorium, mental health professionals taking notes on techniques that I had developed through trial and error in countless therapy sessions. During the question and answer period, Dr. Hayes fielded inquiries about implementation strategies and outcome measurements with the smooth competence of someone who had thoroughly studied my work without ever truly understanding its emotional foundation. "Dr. Hayes," called out a woman from the middle section, "how did you develop the confidence to try such an innovative approach with adolescent populations? Teenage therapy can be so unpredictable." His response made my stomach turn. "Well, innovation requires a willingness to take calculated risks. As clinic director, I have the administrative oversight to ensure that new approaches are implemented safely and effectively. It's about having the leadership vision to see potential where others might see only challenges." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. He was taking credit not just for my methods, but for the courage it had taken to develop them. He had never experienced the anxiety of trying an untested technique with a suicidal teenager, never felt the weight of responsibility that came with genuine innovation in mental health treatment. Yet there he stood, accepting applause for bravery he had never demonstrated. After the presentation, I lingered near the back of the auditorium, watching as colleagues from other clinics approached Dr. Hayes with business cards and collaboration requests. He was booking speaking engagements, discussing consulting opportunities, building a professional network based entirely on my stolen work. The injustice was so profound, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. But something unexpected happened as I watched this professional theft unfold. Instead of feeling defeated, I began to feel coldly analytical. Dr. Hayes had made a critical error in his presentation. He had promised outcomes that he couldn't sustain. He had committed himself to replicating results that required intimate understanding of the therapeutic process, not just surface-level knowledge of the techniques involved. More importantly, he had made these promises in front of hundreds of witnesses, mental health professionals who would be watching for published research, tracking outcome data, and expecting the kind of rigorous follow-up that legitimate innovation demanded. Dr. Hayes had painted himself into a corner where he would have to actually deliver the results he was claiming credit for. I left the conference with a plan crystallizing in my mind. Dr. Hayes thought he had won by stealing my work, but he had actually provided me with the perfect opportunity to expose his fraud. All I had to do was continue developing my method with proper documentation, while he struggled to maintain the illusion of competence with stolen techniques he didn't truly understand. Returning to Sundale Mental Health Center after the conference felt like entering enemy territory. Dr. Hayes was riding high on his newfound professional recognition, scheduling interviews with mental health journals, and accepting invitations to speak at additional conferences. He strutted through the clinic halls with the confidence of someone who believed he had successfully repositioned himself as a thought leader in adolescent mental health. What he didn't realize was that his theft had actually liberated me from any obligation to protect his reputation or the clinic's interests. I began documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. Every therapy session was recorded in detail, every outcome measurement was tracked with scientific rigor, and every innovation was time-stamped and witnessed by colleagues who could later testify to my ongoing development of the therapeutic method. I also made a crucial decision. I would continue refining and improving my approach, while Dr. Hayes was stuck presenting the version he had stolen. Innovation doesn't stop just because someone steals your current work. I began developing advanced techniques, exploring new applications, and pushing the boundaries of what the adaptive response integration method could achieve. While Dr. Hayes was giving the same presentation at conference after conference, I was quietly evolving beyond what he had taken. My relationship with Kevin had reached a turning point during this period. The night I returned from Denver, I finally told him everything about Dr. Hayes' theft, about my plans for documentation and exposure, about the professional betrayal that had consumed my thoughts for months. "Talia," he said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table, "I've been watching you disappear into this obsession for months. I understand you're angry, but is revenge really worth destroying your mental health?" "It's not about revenge," I replied, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about professional integrity. If I don't expose what he's done, he'll keep stealing from other therapists. This is bigger than just my hurt feelings." Kevin studied my face in the lamplight, and I could see him making a decision. "Okay," he said finally. "If this is what you need to do, I'll support you. But promise me you won't lose yourself in the process." That conversation marked a turning point in my strategy. I realized that I needed allies, people who could witness my ongoing work and later verify the timeline of my innovations. I began involving my colleagues more deliberately in my method development, seeking their input on new techniques and inviting them to observe sessions where I tested advanced approaches. Dr. Hayes, meanwhile, was making increasingly grandiose claims about his method's effectiveness. In interviews with professional publications, he suggested that the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol could revolutionize adolescent mental health treatment if implemented widely. He spoke about licensing the approach to other clinics and developing training programs for mental health professionals. The irony was breathtaking. He was trying to monetize and scale techniques that he had never actually practiced, based on understanding that was purely theoretical. But his public promises were creating a paper trail of commitments that would eventually become evidence of his fraudulent claims. I began to see Dr. Hayes' theft not as a devastating setback, but as an incredible opportunity. He had unknowingly provided me with the perfect platform to demonstrate the difference between genuine innovation and academic theft. While he struggled to maintain credibility with stolen material, I would build an unshakable foundation of original research that would ultimately expose his fraud and establish my rightful place as the creator of this therapeutic approach. The first crack in Dr. Hayes' facade appeared 6 months after the Denver conference. A mental health journal had requested follow-up data on the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol, specifically asking for outcome measurements and case studies that demonstrated long-term effectiveness. Dr. Hayes approached me with barely concealed desperation, requesting access to my patient files and session notes. "Talia," he said, trying to maintain his authoritative tone while clearly fishing for information, "I need you to compile comprehensive data on our anxiety treatment outcomes for the past year. The Journal of Adolescent Mental Health wants to feature our program in their fall issue." I looked at him across his pristine office, noting the stress lines around his eyes and the way his usually perfect hair showed signs of anxious running of fingers through it. "Of course, Dr. Hayes," I replied smoothly. "I'll need to review our data collection protocols to ensure we're providing accurate information. What specific outcome measures are they requesting?" His pause was telling. "Well, the usual metrics: success rates, patient satisfaction, long-term follow-up results." He waved his hand vaguely, clearly hoping I would fill in the details he couldn't provide. "I see," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "And which version of the protocol should I focus on? The original implementation from last year, or the updated version we've been developing this quarter?" Another pause, longer this time. Dr. Hayes had no idea that I had continued evolving the method after his theft. In his mind, therapeutic innovation was a static achievement rather than an ongoing process of refinement and improvement. "Just use whatever data you have," he said finally, his voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty I had heard from him. That evening, I worked late in the clinic, not to help Dr. Hayes with his data request, but to organize my own comprehensive documentation. Over the past year, while he had been touring conferences presenting stolen material, I had been building something much more substantial. I had detailed session notes, outcome measurements, patient testimonials, colleague observations, and most importantly, evidence of continued innovation that went far beyond what Dr. Hayes had originally taken. My advanced techniques included what I called anxiety archaeology, helping teenagers trace the historical roots of their anxious responses to develop more targeted coping strategies. I had also developed specialized approaches for anxiety disorders, complicated by trauma, eating disorders, and social media-related stress. These innovations were documented with the same rigorous attention to detail that had characterized my original work, but now I was doing it with full awareness of the professional and legal implications. The most significant development was my collaboration with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a researcher from the university, who had approached me after hearing about my work through professional networks. She was interested in conducting a formal study of my therapeutic approach, complete with control groups, statistical analysis, and peer review. "Talia," she had said during our first meeting, "what you've developed has the potential to significantly impact how we treat adolescent anxiety disorders. Would you be interested in co-authoring a research paper that documents your method and its outcomes?" The opportunity was perfect. A peer-reviewed publication would establish my work in the academic record with proper attribution and rigorous scientific validation. More importantly, it would create a public timeline that would expose Dr. Hayes' theft when compared to his conference presentations and interviews. As I worked late that night, organizing data and preparing materials for Dr. Walsh's research study, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Dr. Hayes' betrayal: genuine excitement about my professional future. I was no longer just defending my stolen work. I was building something that would surpass it entirely. The research paper that Dr. Walsh and I submitted to the American Journal of Clinical Psychology was accepted for publication 18 months after Dr. Hayes' theft. Our study, titled Adaptive Response Integration Method, a novel approach to adolescent anxiety treatment with long-term outcome data, documented 3 years of patient outcomes and established a clear timeline of innovation that predated every one of Dr. Hayes' public presentations. The paper's publication triggered an immediate response from the mental health community. Colleagues who had attended Dr. Hayes' conferences began asking questions about the discrepancies between his claims and our documented research. The Journal of Adolescent Mental Health, which had featured Dr. Hayes' work 6 months earlier, requested clarification about the relationship between the Hayes Integrated Response Protocol and our published method. Dr. Hayes called me into his office the morning the journal article went live online. His usual composure had cracked, revealing the desperate man underneath his professional facade. His hands shook slightly as he held a printed copy of our research paper. "This is a serious problem, Talia," he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "You've created confusion in the field about our clinic's innovations. People are questioning the integrity of our programs." I sat across from him, feeling oddly calm despite the significance of the moment. "I don't understand your concern, Dr. Hayes. The paper clearly documents my therapeutic method and its development timeline. All the data is accurate and verifiable." "Your method." His voice rose sharply. "This is the clinic's intellectual property. You developed this work as an employee, using our resources and our patient population." "Actually," I replied, pulling out a folder I had prepared for this exact conversation, "my employment contract specifies that therapeutic innovations developed independently retain creator attribution rights. I've also documented that this work was developed primarily during my own time, using resources I personally acquired." The color drained from his face as he realized the legal and professional trap he had walked into. The investigation began 3 weeks after our paper's publication. The National Mental Health Professional Ethics Board launched a formal inquiry into allegations of intellectual property theft and fraudulent academic claims. Dr. Hayes was placed on administrative leave while the clinic's board of directors conducted their own internal review. The evidence was overwhelming. I had maintained meticulous records of my method's development, including timestamps, witness statements, and documentation of every innovation. Dr. Hayes, meanwhile, could provide no evidence of his own contributions to the therapeutic approach he had claimed to have created. The clinic's funding situation became critical almost immediately. Sundale Mental Health Center had received substantial grants based on Dr. Hayes' claimed innovations, money that had to be returned when the fraud was exposed. Insurance companies began questioning whether treatments administered under false credentials would be covered, creating a financial crisis that threatened the clinic's entire operation. My colleagues' reactions were mixed. Some expressed outrage on my behalf, angry that they had unknowingly participated in promoting stolen work. Others seemed more concerned about their own job security as the clinic's reputation crumbled. A few admitted they had suspected Dr. Hayes' claims were too good to be true, but had been too intimidated by his position to speak up. Kevin found me in our kitchen one evening, reading yet another email from a journalist requesting interviews about the scandal. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Getting your recognition back?" I considered his question seriously. The professional vindication was satisfying, but what felt more significant was the restoration of my integrity and the validation of every teenager whose progress had been reduced to a footnote in someone else's career ambitions. "It feels like justice," I said finally. "Not just for me, but for every patient whose story was stolen along with my work." The most fitting aspect of my revenge wasn't the destruction of Dr. Hayes' career, but the elevation of the work itself to its proper place in the field of adolescent mental health treatment. As I reflected on this long journey from theft to vindication, I realized that Dr. Hayes had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation to prove that genuine innovation always triumphs over academic fraud, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself.